Washington, D.C., they're trying to lower the voting age to 16 years old. Now, Washington, D.C. is like the leftist hotspot of the country. They wish they were part of California. I remember when I was up there, we were trying to film a Kratom protest, and we stopped at this booth where they were selling t-shirts. It was like, Hillary is my Messiah t-shirts. It was so over the top. And there's this seller, and I said, it's a joke, right? And he's like, no joke, no joke. And he could barely speak English. Yeah, that kind of mentality is everywhere in Washington, D.C. It's so over the top. 92% of those who voted in Washington, D.C. voted for Hillary in 2016. 92%. It was like 4% voted for Trump. You don't see that kind of disparity anywhere in the country. Because that's where all the bureaucrats live. Alright. But this isn't just a Washington, D.C. thing. I've begun to see talk about lowering the voting age to 16 in various different leftist states, left-leaning states. They want to get kids to vote before they've really experienced real life, before they've learned the lesson that what your teachers tell you isn't true. You see, about the age of 15 to 16, most people have this mindset where they're like, everything that my parent tells me is wrong. But my teachers, they're a source of wisdom and knowledge. It's stupid, but it's the way most people are. And then eventually, we all come to some kind of painful realization that our parents were right about more than we'd like to admit. It's just part of maturing, of growing up. And moreover, that our teachers were trying to push a certain narrative, were actually being dishonest. Right? Okay, but they're trying to get them to vote at that age. That kind of messed up age where we think we know everything but don't. Okay. The voting age used to be 21. It got lowered to 18 during the Vietnam War era. That's because a lot of people thought that it was immoral, that we were sending 18 and 19-year-olds off against their will because it was a draft, in many cases to die, and they had no say in the matter. They couldn't vote. And so for that reason, the voting age was lowered to 18. But before that it wasn't, because as a society we knew. We knew that, these teenagers didn't really know what life was like, and thus they shouldn't be making decisions that affect other people's lives. And voting gives authority to a person, gives authority over other people's lives, and that's crucial. I think it ought to be accepted, it's not, but it ought to be accepted that we would have a better country if people who were dependent on others didn't vote. And I mean people who live at home with their parents didn't vote, and people who rely on government assistance didn't vote. And I get it, some people, run into hard times and they're on government assistance for a short period of time. But when they get back up on their feet, they can vote again. The bottom line is that in America, if you are not doing well financially, you're making some bad decisions. That's all there is to it. You've done something wrong, and so you're in a bad place. And you need to learn from your mistakes and not apply those same mistakes to the rest of your city, county, country, whatever it is. That's why you shouldn't be voting, because you're going to impose those bad ideas onto other people when you're dependent on someone. Okay? There used to be, it's been referred to as oppressive, but we used to have it so that you voted if you had ownership of land. But the reason for that was good. The reason was so that you should have some measure of success. Maybe it wasn't the best measure, but you should have some measure of success before, you have a right to affect other people's lives. I heard of I think it was a congresswoman recently, who didn't understand why people would hold it against her that she was $200,000 in debt. I don't know why we have this disconnect between people's lives and the fact that they're going to affect other people, their own lives, and they're going to affect other people's. You see what I'm saying? If you can't maintain your own life, then should you really be impacting others? I think the answer is clearly no. But also, when you put kids in a position of authority, it generally ends badly. Like, there's been this long tradition in military schools, military academies, where they tend to put kids, certain students, in a hierarchical fashion, you know, ahead of other students, in charge of them. And you see violence rates that are higher in many cases than prison life. Ridiculously high. Kids aren't good in positions of authority. They're just not. You have this like Lord of the Flies scenario, which is like a horror book, right? I mean, this is just something that we all know. But we're trying to get them to vote. Or should I say, leftists are trying to get them to vote. Because, you know, if you tell a 16-year-old, well, don't you think that society should pay for your free college? Of course they're going to vote yes. Especially since they don't pay taxes. I mean, seriously. It's an obvious vote. And that's why they're pushing it. It's not because of any other reason, regardless of the excuses. But also, these kids are actively in school. For the international audience, you don't graduate in the US until you get to 18. Alright, they're actively in school, and they're essentially being indoctrinated. The schools are incredibly politicized now. There have been some cases that have made national news in the last few years, but think about all the cases that haven't made the national news, because kids don't want to stand out. More than anything, when you're a teenager, you want to blend in and not really be noticed that much. You certainly don't want to be on TV doing an interview about how you were discriminated against because of, say, the t-shirt that you were wearing. No, you don't want that. But look at the cases that we do have. You have over at St. Augustine High School. They were supposed to fill in the blank on a sentence. Here's the sentence. Right when it appeared the nation was becoming increasingly tolerant of alternative lifestyles, immigration, and minorities, the vocal and angry right wing forced the nation to make a complete something, embracing bigotry, xenophobia, and sexism, unquote. I mean, really. Seriously, it's just so over the top. And then, over at Jackson Hole High School in Wyoming, well, they were going over Animal Farm, you know, the George Orwell book. Well, there was a question in there about who a certain character was shooting. So multiple choice answer. One of the potential answers was, he was shooting at Trump. Seriously, like, what teacher thought that that was going to be okay? Wouldn't you at least want to pretend that you weren't biased? If only to save your job? You know, enlightened self-interest kind of thing? Apparently not. And then, of course, there have been multiple kids who've been thrown out of school for wearing pro-Trump t-shirts. There was one, well, at least one, who was thrown off of school grounds. He was just sitting there with a Trump name on the back of his shirt, and he was thrown out of the sporting event on school grounds for wearing that. A lot of teachers' careers have been destroyed over that kind of thing, and rightly so. That's great. I have a friend who has a 10-year-old daughter, and she had a spelling test recently. One of the words in the spelling test was feminist. I'm pretty sure that they didn't include like an accurate description of what feminism was. I'm sure they said something about equality for women. I'm sure it wasn't. Feminism is an ideology that is anti-male and seeks to destroy the family unit and is destructive toward anybody that it gets close to. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it wasn't something like that. But again, these are just, most of these are just the cases that go national. You have a strong political bias all across the country in high schools and colleges, everywhere. I remember when I think I was about 14 to 15, and we were asked to write a paper on multiculturalism. And it was so obvious that what they were seeking was a paper on the virtues of multiculturalism. They didn't say it, but we all knew it. We had to talk about it afterwards. The kids who decided to get the grade versus those who decided to, state their real opinions. Because that's what you were choosing between. I remember writing one about how multiculturalism was an oxymoron, because when you put multiple cultures together, you end up with a monoculture that is not as good as the best of the cultures. And therefore it was a bad thing. Yeah, I was a bad student. Okay. And then you've got modern history books, which are revisionist. They're designed to make kids feel ashamed of what their ancestors did. And by that I mean build the best civilization ever. Really. And also to keep them in the dark. I remember I left school when I was 16, which is the age of graduation in England. And at that age, I didn't know who Stalin was, or Pol Pot. It wasn't because I wasn't paying attention, I was in the best classes, and yet I didn't know because they didn't teach it, because they didn't want us to know. They didn't want us, I don't know if it's as bad in America yet, but it will be if it's not. They didn't want us to know what the effects were of communist regimes, or socialist regimes for that matter either. They didn't want us to know. Because when you know about history, you don't repeat it. You don't repeat the same mistakes. And the truth is that real history vindicates Western civilization. And it shows us how lucky we are to live in a capitalistic society that values rights, right? The system of natural law. It's just, if you look at history and all the different civilizations, what you really see is different oppressive environments, different degrees of oppressive, right? And so we're so incredibly free, but if you don't teach kids that, then they think that they're in some kind of awful civilization, and it's just so bad. And we're not. we're so not. And, you know, you should homeschool if you have kids, and if that's an option at all, you should homeschool. I've heard parents say that they don't feel qualified. They had a public school education, and they don't feel qualified to teach their kids. And the question is, if you don't feel qualified with that education, then why are you sending your kids off to get the same education that you received? I mean, if you really think about it. But it's so easy to homeschool now. There's like even, you can do it online and it'll take you like 99% of the way there. So seriously, do it. Otherwise, your kids don't just get imbued with these anti-values, which they do, but also with things that aren't true, like anti-facts. It's like, there's the famous Ronald Reagan quote that says, the trouble with our liberal friends is not that they're ignorant, it's just that they know so much that isn't so. And that's so true. Because, you know, they have these facts that just aren't true. It's maddening because you can't get through to them because they think they know something. It would be fine if they knew that they had some kind of, you know, a blank spot, because then they'll listen to you. But no, they think they know everything. It's infuriating. And that's why some companies are now favoring kids who have not gone to college. And, you know, there's a part of me that finds that shocking, but it shouldn't be, because I've experienced these educational places. I understand, and I've experienced these people, you know, these socialist entitled brats that come out of college. But, you know, the whole point of college was to give the kid knowledge so that he doesn't need to be trained by the company, right? So that he's more likely to be hired. But instead, the companies are now starting to lean toward, maybe it's just easier if we teach them ourselves and spare them the social justice lecture or lectures, you know? And that's just kind of, it's horrible, really, when you think about it. And these kids have no sense of just right and wrong. In fact, many of them will tell you that. There is no right and wrong, they'll tell you. There's just shades of grey, shades of immorality, or morality is just subjective. No, it's not. There is a right and there is a wrong. You know, it's, what do you say? The point here is that these leftist areas that, or people, they're trying to attract uninformed voters, like we're just talking about with the kids, right? Because it's not just 16-year-old kids who think they know everything but don't. It's also, say, illegal immigrants who, you know, most of the time don't even learn to speak English. They certainly couldn't pass, say, an American civics course. You know, most millennials can't either, but beside the point. Okay, and then there's the third group that they're trying to get to vote, which is poor people, like the poorest of American society. And again, if you are living in America and you are extremely poor, you're doing something wrong. Seriously, you're making some bad decisions. And you need to, I mean, you know, that could be a result of, you know, one generation passing it down to you, the wrong lessons. I don't know, in your particular case. But the reality is, if you are extremely poor in America, you need to make different decisions. What you don't need to be doing is making decisions for other people. Like, because you've gone wrong. You've made some mistakes. And they need to be fixed. You know, imposing those on other people is just wrong. This is basic, right? But the left want these people, these most uninformed voters, to vote, instead of trying to favor the most educated or those who are most successful. That's not who they're trying to get to vote. Alright. We can't let people vote until they're experienced enough to realize that they've been lied to by the institutions that were supposed to teach them. And that is kind of happening, like, for instance, the millennial generation, my generation, are increasingly, I think, becoming better. Like, the longer they've been out in the workforce, the longer they've experienced real life, the better they are. But this is just the way it is. As long as our educational institutions are as bad as they are now, there needs to be, like, some grace period, before they get to vote. And 16-year-olds will never be the best voters, even if you had the perfect educational system. They're 16, they think they know everything. Okay, well, that's all I had to say for now. If you liked this video, and I hope you did, please like it and share it with your friends. I can't state that enough, that I am completely reliant on you to spread the word about these videos. So do that, and subscribe on YouTube. There's also a link in the description that will provide you with different ways to subscribe and get notified of new videos. I also have another link with ways to support these videos, what I'm doing right here. Thank you so much to those who already have. Okay, take care.
Check out our official products at our home site, healthwise.org. We have been helping people to live better and healthier lives for a decade. Our products tend to be more effective than other products, as they work with nature instead of against it. We recommend our Colloidal Copper Lotion, which is our flagship product, or everyone's favorite, the Dental Cleanser. Thank you for listening and for your support.